Hi, Chris.
Hey, Chris. Hi, Dawn.
Sorry. Hi, hi, Deborah. Hi, Tammy.
Hi, I'm going to go ahead and put the first lines into the chat about the starting the meeting.
Oh, thank you so much.
Hey, Chris, this is Kim.
Hi, Kim.
Can you make me a co-host so I can promote the people?
Yeah. Let's see. I didn't actually realize you weren't already one.
Hi,
make
Tammy.
co-host.
Hey, Deborah.
There you go. Thank you, Kim.
All right, thanks.
Now, I just admitted as panelists two call-in participants because I think they're committee members. I'm just not sure. So one person's phone number ends in 7136. Might that be?
Hey, Chris, this is Banasha.
Oh, hi, Monashe, welcome. All right, perfect. It just says your number instead of your name, so I just wanted to be sure. And then my other caller, your phone number ends in 0728. And you're on mute, so we can't hear you, but you've been promoted. So let us know if you're a commissioner.
And Bonachet, did you intend for your video to be off? We just we weren't sure because we're having I think some glitches with people not able to enable their video.
No, I have to call in today.
Okay, no problem. So that's not us then.
Yeah, no, it's on my
great.
end. And just to be responsible, I may be in and out of cell reception. Like
Okay.
it'll drop in, out. If it does, just Chris or Kim or anyone, if you guys can help me back in, that would be great.
Oh, our pleasure.
Okay,
Hey, Chris, can you hear me?
Oh, hi, Jim. I knew you were calling in, so I thought it might be you.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great.
Welcome, Jim. So Jim, I don't know if you can see everybody, so I will just let you know that we're still short of a few commissioners. So it's a minute till, but I think I would recommend we wait a couple more minutes for folks to arrive.
Sure. I'm only by phone. I can't see anybody. I've got no internet.
No worries. And Bonachet and Jim, we can hear you both pretty well. It could just be on my end, but you sound a little soft. It's not, we can totally hear you, but I just wanted to flag that in case anyone has trouble hearing you later in the meeting. Right now, you're fine.
Jim's volume sounded soft to me. Bonachet sounded fine to me.
Fine. It could just be like how close you are to your microphone, but we were able to make out what you were saying.
How's that? Is it any better?
Oh, sorry.
There's a background. Are you flying, Jim? Or
Yeah, it sounds like you just turned on a machine.
So Jim, we have Tammy, we have Kim, who just arrived, Savage and Wormsley, and we have you, and we have Bonachet, and Christian had previously, and Eric had, well, Christian had previously told me that he thought he would be unavailable, so we're not expecting him, although I suppose anything could happen. So we'll wait for a couple more folks, but maybe give him like another minute since it's only 12:30.
Okay.
And we're expecting quorum, right, Chris?
We are, but we're not voting on anything today, so
Okay.
it's not, I think, mission critical if for some
Okay.
reason we don't achieve it. But only Christian said he couldn't come.
Okay.
Hi, Bonnie.
Hello,
Welcome.
thank you.
Hi, Amin.
Hey, everyone.
I'm just checking our roll call sheet to see who else we're expecting.
And Amin and I have a 2 o'clock rules committee meeting, so I'll probably need to hop off if this goes for the full time about 15 minutes before. But I mean, you can stay if you want.
And then just give me one moment. I think maybe Rich told me that he wasn't going to make it just very recently. Let me check my email. Otherwise, we have almost everybody.
I'm trying to promote Richard now.
Oh, great.
Okay, great.
Thanks for promoting everybody, Kim.
You're welcome. Okay, you should have Rich Reines now also.
Hi, Rich.
Oh, let me get Eric.
And Eric.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good. Thank you, Rich. Hi, Lauren. Hi, Donna. All right, and so since we're not expecting Christian, right? Is he here? No, okay. He wasn't able to come as of like 2 weeks ago. So if we're not expecting Christian, I think we're actually have everybody. Jim, if you
Oh, I have
would
to
like.
read.
Oh
I
yeah,
have to
Deborah,
read.
please go for it.
Okay. Welcome committee members, liaisons, and members of the public to the Homeless Prevention Committee. Thank you for joining us. We will begin at 12:30 or a little bit after. We are using Zoom with the goal to foster a more inclusive environment and effective meeting. If you would like to comment during the meeting, please type "I have a comment" or "I have a question" in the chat, and a message will be sent to the host. Alternately, you can also use the raise hand feature. In efforts of transparency for all those joining this public meeting, whether by phone or Zoom, we request that you refrain from having side conversations on chat about the content of the meeting. Again, the chat feature is utilized simply as a tool for you to virtually indicate that you would like to speak in order to help the chair facilitate the discussion. New going forward, all LSTFC and committee meetings will be recorded and posted to the State Bar website. A friendly reminder that this is a video conference, and please be aware of your surroundings behind you.
Great, thank you so much, Deborah. And Jim, if you like, staff can take the roll call now.
Yeah, go ahead, take roll.
Okay, Meeker.
Here.
Aflagi.
Yes, here.
Al-Saraf.
Here.
Iskin. Eric.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, great, thank you. Mahoney.
Here.
Rhinus.
Here.
Savage.
Here.
And then Schreiber Christian was unable to come. So, right. And for liaisons, Selena Copeland, Bonnie Huff.
I'm here, thank you.
Christine Ganong, Mark Tony. Okay, and then for State Bar staff, I have Dwan Nguyen.
Here.
Chris McConkey is here. Danielle McRae is on a monitoring visit today. Deborah McReynolds.
I'm
Hi,
here.
Deborah is here.
Yes, I'm here.
Donna Hershkowitz. Hi, Donna. Brady Dewar was unable to come today, and then Kim Wormsley. Hi, Kim. I see you.
Hi, sorry, I was on mute.
That's okay. And then for other attendees, I see Lauren from Legal Aid Association of California. Hi, Lauren.
Hello.
Hi. And I also see Melanie Snyder from the Judicial Council.
Hi.
Melanie. And have I missed anybody?
There's a member of the public. There's a Brenda Aureliano from Central Legal that's on as an attendee.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim. And in fact, Jim, if you'd like to start with public comment, we can ask Brenda if she'd like to make a public comment. Would that be okay?
Sure,
Okay.
let's consider ourselves open for public comment.
Kim, would you mind giving Brenda permission to talk so we can see if she'd like to?
Okay, she should be able to talk now.
Hi there. I don't have a public comment. I was told to be here, but if I shouldn't be, I can jump off.
No, you're
Sorry.
welcome. This is a public meeting. We're glad you're here.
I'm surprised I'm the only person of the public. So.
Oh, yes, we're flying under the radar over here. No, thank you. Welcome. What we'll do is, since you don't have a public comment, we'll rescind the permission to talk, but we're glad you're here, and thanks for attending to listen. Okay. Okay, so the Jim, I don't want to speak over you as committee chair, but I know you're attending by phone today, and you can't like see everybody and stuff. So that I'll just kind of like signpost for you that our only business item, we don't have any minutes to vote on today. Our only business item is for the scoring team for the HP3 competitive grants to ask the full committee for input about the 3 proposals that elevated. It's a kind of a feedback moment. We have a couple of particular questions about them. And then there's no item to vote on, and so we might even be able to end this meeting a little early. But Jim, did you want to open it with any framing or anything?
Yeah, I kind of consider this meeting kind of a further elaboration of the calibration meeting, in that the scoring team has gone through all the proposals. There was pretty good agreement amongst the members of the team, but we came across kind of 3 examples that we'd like to have a little bit more input from the committee as a whole. We've got the 3 proposals we asked you all to look at. One represents an issue, if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, that it's kind of a narrow scope, in that it was primarily focused on one kind of neighborhood in San Francisco. We've got another one from...
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say that's correct. Yeah, I believe that's eviction. And we're having a little trouble hearing you. We can mostly hear you, but you're very quiet. That's Eviction Defense Collaborative is focusing on I think it's Bayview.
Bayview, right.
In San Francisco.
Right. The other one is sort of a different approach, in that it is it's creating a tool in cooperation with the court system, and this tool has the potential application statewide of being a very broad impact, but it's not your typical eviction defense. And that's the one from Inner City Law Center. And then the final one is from One Justice Support Center. And again, this is not focused on specific eviction defense, but it has potential of increasing the ability of all providers of addressing the issue of impact. And I guess it was impact, right, Chris?
That's correct. And whatever you just did helped. I can hear you a lot more now than before. Yeah. So the only thing I would add, because that was a great summary, was the scoring team was able to take the information I got at the calibration session on October 29 and come to a unified, that is a 4-person consensus, like everyone on the team agreed as to every single row of the rubric for every single proposal, including special consideration, except project impact and strategies for these 3. And that does not reflect, if I can speak for the other members of the scoring team, a lack of confidence in the proposal. It was more like, oh, we don't know if this is a below meets or maybe even an exceeds. There's something so unique about it that we're not totally sure that the calibration session captured. We kind of wish these were part of the calibration session, that the feedback we got was quite enough for these 3, because they were something about it stood out so spectacularly. And so and then Jim just described what those things were. And so it's really focused on project impact strategies. Correct me if this is wrong, Dwan or Jim, but I think we had a good sense of org capacity, rural, underserved, and even maybe a special consideration for them. Like we feel confident we can come to a consensus score, but it was just impact and strategies. And Dwan, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit about the review process from the scoring team. Even though we've landed in a place where there's more or less consensus in a lot of those categories, it did take several calibration sessions amongst us to kind of get to that point. I'll just give an example for myself. In the evaluations category, I did grade it a little bit too strictly. And then when we met as a team, I realized that we had to recalibrate for my score. And so we had, I believe, at least 3 or 4 meetings where the scoring team met and went through each application and each individual line item for that particular project.
Great. And then Jim, I don't think you can see it. I'll let you know when people raise their hand. So Eric raised his hand.
Yeah, it would help me for framing a little bit, if you could give an example of maybe one project or 2 that the other ones where you had an agreement on that were rated exceeds expectations or rated highly in project impact, and whatever the other dimension is that you want our input on.
Great. Let me pull up our master scoring spreadsheet. This will just take a second.
And while Chris is pulling that up, we do have one more meeting for this committee where we're going to go through the full scoring sheet, and you'll have visibility into not just the scores, but the scoring team's funding recommendation. So you'll be able to, I think, put it in better context once you have the full sheet at your fingertips.
So one that the scoring team felt pretty strongly or pretty comfortable giving and exceeds was, oops, I think it's Inland County's legal services. And I will pull up my notes just to give you a sense of why we did that. While I'm pulling up the notes though, just sort of from memory, Inland County's legal services, actually, hold on, I have it. So the scoring team was really impressed with the number of clients they were going to serve, how they were going to serve them, and the geography of their service area. So, for instance, we found and exceeds expectations to be for Inland County's legal services. They were going to serve 450 clients total. 100 were going to be cases would be extended services, 150 would be limited, and 200 cases would be counsel and advice. And they were going to create what they're calling a mobile access center to provide, I think literally they're going to have like a bus or something that will provide on-site legal aid, homelessness prevention legal aid to the hardest to reach areas of their service area. So it's like they serve San Bernardino and Riverside County. So it's like Cathedral City and Coachella and Desert Hot Springs and Palm Desert and Palm Springs, et cetera, 29 Palms. And so essentially that was like a very, very tailored like way to get legal services staff on the ground, on site, like at the client's location in the high desert, and their clients were going to be predominantly already homeless as opposed to tenants that are trying to resolve like a habitability issue. So it was a particularly hard to reach and hard to work with community, and their numbers were so high, and the team was confident that they could meet those numbers because it's a pretty well run organization, that they got an exceed. So that was Inland County's legal services. And I will say we didn't give, you'll see all of our scores on December 2nd, but we didn't give out a lot of exceeds for project impact and strategies. There's only a handful that I see on our scoring spreadsheet. I don't know if this is tipping our hand too much, Dwan and Jim, for me to say this, but can I say what way the scoring team was leaning on some of these? I think One Justice was the only one where we didn't have a really firm leaning, but the scoring team was actually leaning towards exceeds. I don't want to bias the committees by saying this, but we were actually leaning slightly towards exceeds for Inner City Law Center, and we were leaning slightly towards exceeds for Eviction Defense Collaborative. And I think maybe One Justice was more of an open question, but if it's helpful, the scoring team can just share its impressions with you. It's not meant to, you're not supposed to put any weight on this, but for Inner City Law Center, the sort of novel question there was the nature of their online toolkit. We weren't, it has the potential, I'm thinking like, so a client will go visit the website, and then they will use the software to generate answers and like evictions proceedings and like cases. It has the potential to reach a lot of clients in a very desperate situation all across the state. But it is also sort of it's designed by attorneys, but it sort of looks like an algorithm providing the services. So potential for enormous impact and to truly ameliorate homelessness throughout the whole state, but also maybe not exactly what AB 164 envisioned when it's describing. It's not that the language like clearly prohibits it, but it's not the sort of standard list of like in-person attorney provided legal aid. And so the scoring team really, really liked that proposal, but didn't feel confident just giving it an exceeds and moving on, and wanted to bring it back. I'll pause there to see if Dwan and Jim want to recharacterize that in any way.
We thought because of the novelness of the project that at the very least you all should be aware that, and when you see the scoring sheet, this is a project that scored very high. I think it was, if we end up giving it exceeds, it might be our top score. So we wanted you all to feel comfortable that this, because it was novel, that this was the direction that this was a score for this particular project. because of that technology component, though the scoring team really thought it was, it could have a lot of impact because of that technology component.
And also, it was very impressive that they had cooperation of the LA courts so that the system would get all UD submissions, and it has the potential of really eliminating the default judgments because it would be automatically entered in the system. So the project also could serve as an example of cooperation throughout the state with not only utilization of this tool, but also cooperative efforts with the courts.
I'm unsure about the order, but I want to say Rich raised his hand first.
I was struck by this proposal because it seemed a mismatch between the clients to be served and the tools to be used. And I wondered how that's addressed in this proposal. It's a high technology approach to solving this problem for a community to which technology and access to technology may be a challenge.
That's really helpful. Kim, and we're taking notes, by the way, so the scoring team can reconvene after this meeting to discuss it. Kim?
Well, first to respond to Rich, which I wasn't planning on doing, was I think that a component of this project could be informing the users of the availability of public library computers. And there are a lot of community resources. I agree with what Rich says. We're talking about serving a population that probably does not have access. I think everybody has a cell phone these days, homeless people included, or houseless, as the term is being used now. Anyway, and you can use the technology from your cell phone. So I think that would have been an important thing to put in, but I think that's a component that inner city could easily do. In terms of whether this is problematic in terms of the language from the legislature, I actually don't think it is, because they specifically state that this is a way to get people to file an answer, essentially to buy time so that there's not a default judgment within 5 days, and then they will be providing full scope representation. Obviously not to everybody who has the potential of filing an answer, but I wasn't really worried about that because I think they are going to be doing the one-to-one. That would be my defense of what I think is also, like you guys, a really terrific proposal.
And also, Rich, my reading of this is not only is it just reliant upon the clients to use the system, but that the inner city law center would also have access to this data, so they would know who's being evicted, the UD, so that they could outreach, so that they could actually go to the clients and say, hey, look, we can help you with this process, so that at least you have an answer and you don't default.
I'm not sure how to raise my hand on the phone, and if there's anyone else online, Chris. But,
is that Bonachet? No,
it is.
It's all right. Well, if Tammy and Amin wouldn't mind, maybe we can let you. I'll go with Tammy and Amin first, and then I will remember Bonachet. Yeah. You're next. How about that?
That's perfect. That's
okay.
Great. Thank you.
Tammy, you're up.
Yeah. So I was going to say the same thing actually of what Kim said. When I look at that targeted population, while they may have a cell phone or they have a computer, that also assumes that they have either Wi-Fi or internet capability to use the tool. So that's a different question, because the cell phone, requiring data, I don't know. They couldn't demonstrate that within proposal of really the access to that tool. I think it's a great tool. I think it's a great idea. Again, question along the lines Richard did. How does it reach that population? If they can strengthen the proposal by demonstrating that, I could see where it would succeed. But for that reason, I put it more rated at a meeting.
So, the scoring team isn't asking, deliberately isn't asking the committee to actually decide in a vote, is this a meets or an exceeds or a below? But if you wouldn't mind actually just saying which way you were leaning, I think this one might be a below for me, or this one could just be a meets or something, or I'm unsure. Staff will take note of that too. That's really helpful. So I don't know if Tammy, where you fall on that. And I mean, I'll ask you that question too in just a moment.
Yeah, I had it as a need for the reasons, yeah, again, I'm not sure how accessible that tool will be. I love the idea, just not sure how accessible it will be to the target population.
And then Amin.
Yeah, I had it at Exceeds, and I think it's an innovative tool. I think it'd be interesting to know what the data is, but from what I've seen and heard, I think access is probably higher than we might expect in terms of technology, access to a computer or a smartphone, and then giving access. What I do know, and I think they say they're going to do outreach and education and inform people of ways that they can access this if they have access to a computer or phone. I think they also, I know that Intercity itself provides access to those things at its offices, and I think that was a component of what they included, that they are located on Skid Row, and I know that they do have sort of, and during COVID, have had their offices open for clients to come in. I don't know if they have an intention of making this available in that respect, but I do think that having something like this is will be pretty impactful. And I think whether that's, the public library, which I know the law library has been a place where people can go, other libraries where they can have computer access, but just giving people the ability to do it this way, and maybe even, working with the courts. I don't know if that's part of how much they've done that. I don't remember seeing that in there in terms of like the self-help centers where they can sort of directly access this. I think we'll have a really significant and so my view is exceeds expectations, and exceeds expectations, and I think this will be really useful.
Thank you, Min. And then I promised Banashe she could go next. So Banashe.
Thank you. So I'm with Amin. I think this succeeds for a number of reasons that have already been stated. But
sorry, Banashe, you're a little quiet. Could you speak even closer to the phone?
Is this?
Oh,
is
that's
this
much
better?
Yeah, that's much better.
Okay, great. Yeah, so a couple of the items. I think one of the things that we've been looking at through each of these kind of tranches of the HP grants is looking at impact, looking at innovation. I know this time we're not really looking at the innovative part, but this is brilliant. I can just imagine if we were to start to add, if others were to pick up, or they themselves, the organization itself, were to add on AI or machine learning, how much more data could be collected, and what could really be done with all of that data collection from this vantage point. And then, on the point of access, they say here that they have, if I'm not reading this incorrectly, that they have 80 coalition partners that they're going to be engaging with, and that there's a pathway to obviously get more people to utilize this service. So I think this is exceeds. It's really well written, really well thought out, and the impact I can see beyond just this grant making.
Thank you, Banashe.
Thank you.
We were able to hear you pretty well at the end there, so that was good. Eric.
Yeah, so I guess I have a couple questions. One, I wasn't quite following what Jim said about how somehow in LASC, everybody's going to get access to this. Didn't quite follow that. Also, I mean, for all these computer tools, do we have enough expertise on this call to know that this is unique? In other words, that nobody else is doing this? I mean, if it is, that's great. And there were $200,000 in sub-grants here on this one that didn't seem to be terribly well specified. Once although I could have missed it, I read this pretty quickly, how that money was going to be spent. So, I mean, so how is this going to work? So you're going to have this tool out there, and people are going to be able to automatically fill out an answer, right? So they'll have an answer on file. Then what's going to happen to the rest of the case? You know, are the partner organizations then gonna step in and help these people actually in court, or not quite following how this is going to work? So bottom line is, I mean, it may be wonderful. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just not sure. So I guess I'm kind of in the not sure category.
I just pulled up their proposal to see if I can pull any details, if I can pull any answers from it. But Jim, did you want to respond to Eric's first point?
Yeah, well, my understanding is that they have a cooperation and agreement with the LA County courts, so that they're going to be notified on these UD filings, so that they know who the potential client pool is out there, and that they'll be able to assist them. And also they'll get feedback, so that they'll get the data on what happens to these cases after the answer is filed. That is it only successful if they go in and help represent them, or can the client can the client successfully defend on their own after they file the answer? I mean, that's an unknown. I mean, and I thought that was one of the values of this project, is that they would be collecting this data extensively for LA County to know if an answer is enough, if it only works if they step in and actually represent them, or what else is needed. As far as is anyone else doing it, I have no idea. I would have thought if other people were doing it, that they would be applying for these grants to expand what their current capabilities were. But as far as personal knowledge, I have none.
Bonnie, were you going to say something? I think Bonnie just unmuted.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have not read this carefully. I just was sort of going through. I think while there are certainly some other programs out there, I don't think that is frankly determinative, because there are lots of ways of doing this, and if they've come up with a simpler way and way that can get out there and all that, this is a complicated area. It appears that they have a lot of partnerships. But Jim, I have to say the court, I don't see in reading it, and maybe I'm missing it, but I don't think the court can let anyone know who has filed, because these cases are confidential and are masked. And that what they will know is if there's an e-filing, if it's rejected, they'll be able to understand that, and they'll be able to try and address that right away, which would be great. But again, there's a big data challenge with unlawful detainer filings that they are confidential. And that is not to say, I mean, you know, it looks like a very interesting proposal, so I'll leave it at that. But, and I think the reality is just honestly getting something on file is huge based on our review of files which the Judicial Council can get access to, because we're associated with the court, that makes a huge difference for people just having that on file.
Yeah.
And so.
I think that where they talk about working with the court is just what you just described, Bonnie. So in their evaluation response, they say, within LA County, the UD answers will be filed electronically. This will tell us if the courts are accepting or rejecting the answers. If clerks are rejecting the answers, we'll figure out why and promptly change the program to produce the required change. I think that was what you just described is exactly what they articulated. Rich.
Yeah, my experience with UDs is a bit dated, but I think that the filing of an answer is a very significant part of it, as Bonnie was alluding to. The landlords or their mill council count on taking defaults. And once there's an answer filed, the cases, in my experience, move laterally, not through the court system, but because the landlords are then forced to put on evidence, and there may be witnesses, and the outcome is not as certain as it might otherwise have been. There's a greater opportunity to come to some resolution short of eviction. I think this project exceeds expectations. If Chris Schreiber were with us, he would applaud the innovation, which he's been pushing all of us to try to push in our applications. And I think this is an example of that. So I like it a lot. It raises a lot of questions, but maybe that's because it's novel.
Thank you, Rich. And Kim? And Kim, actually, I realized earlier I didn't get which way you were leaning. It sounded like you might have been in Exceeds, but
I am definitely in Exceeds. And I think someone raised a question again about access. And I think in the proposal I read that the tool would be shared with other QLSPs, which I think helps to reach as many people as possible. Their numbers of how many people they expect to assist through this tool is pretty remarkable. And yes, I agree, Rich. Chris would be jumping for joy on this one.
Yeah, if I can, this is Banasha, if I can jump in. I agree, Kim and Eric, Kim and Rich, that Chris would be doing that really backflips. I honestly think I want to add in one additional. I think this proposal is a model proposal, in my opinion, through all of the HP cycles of grants that we've done thus far. This to me really stands out as the highest caliber that we've seen.
Great, thank you, Banashe. And you'll see the scores on December 2nd, but this was, I had mentioned earlier that the scoring team was leaning towards Exceeds, and if that's what they got, it would be one of the highest scoring proposals, I think. Jim or Dwan, is there any, I actually feel like I have enough guidance to take back to the scoring team on this one. Do you have any other questions for the group?
No, thank you for your feedback. I think there's a leaning of the Exceeds, and I think that's what the scoring team was leaning on too. So we'll confer again to firm this up, but
all right.
Unless there are any other comments on this project proposal, we'll move on to the next one.
Yeah, agreed. Let's go to the next one.
I would propose we move on to Eviction Defense Collaborative, EDC is the next one. I don't know if it was helpful or unhelpful for me to lead with like what the scoring team was thinking, but I'm happy to do that again. So for Eviction Defense Collaborative, Jim previously mentioned that we elevated this one because it was the most focused geographically. It wasn't even on just one county, because there were plenty of proposals that were going to focus on just one county. This was a very particular neighborhood within a city/county. So it's Bayview within San Francisco. And so that's why this triggered a question about project impact and strategies, because it was so narrow in its geographic focus. That being said, the scoring team was also deciding between a meets and an exceeds here. So this is not we weren't thinking of below for this one, but we were wondering, can this be an exceeds if it's just focused on just this one neighborhood? Dwan or Jim, is there anything else you'd flag about this one? This is like a traditional homelessness prevention, like housing law services project.
And this is, and I know you hadn't had the benefit of reviewing all the applications like we have. The quantitative numbers on this project is very high, and that's why we're leaning towards the exceeds. But we did want to again bring it to the full committee because the narrowness of the geographic area.
All right, so Rich.
Yeah, I was struck by the budget on this one. It appears as though they're counting on a full-time equivalent lawyer attorney of about 1/20th of the time that'll be spent on this project. And I wondered if folks felt that would structurally meet our requirements.
Wait, say that again, Rich. You're saying they've only allocated a 1/20th of a lawyer to this project?
Yeah, unless I've got too confused, but I think this is the first in the agenda. Isn't that right, Chris?
This is the first one in the packet, yeah.
Yeah,
and I'm pulling up the budget right now just to refresh my memory.
It struck me as very odd that they had so little attorney time. Paralegal time and associate times were appropriate, but the attorney time was tiny. And we always ask them if the structure is such, the infrastructure of their project is going to help them succeed. And I wondered if this would be adequate. Am I reading that right, Chris?
Yeah, it is mostly, so I just pulled it up. They're 3-year project budget, it has, for all 3 years combined, a little over $113,000 for attorney salaries, about $200,000 for paralegal salaries, and over $800,000 for other staff. And then, so non-paralegals, non-attorneys. And then if I go to their narrative, other staff, if folks don't mind me just reading it out loud, they describe it as supervising right to counsel coordinator will oversee the work of the right to counsel coordinator, the legal intake and eviction referral processes. So at the Bayview Legal Clinic, the right to counsel coordinator conducts client legal intakes, assists with notice and answers, and makes eviction referrals. So it sounds to me like the attorneys are supervising a lot of non-attorneys. Provide social work, the caseworker provides social work services, assisting clients with psychosocial needs and acquiring expanded public benefits when needed. And then they have an intake specialist, a shelter client advocate. Yeah, and that's it.
And
so,
can I just add one thing? Also, looking at their project budget right now, they do have a little bit more than one FTE in the first year for an attorney, and then it gets pared down a lot. So I think that's a strategic move, whether that's because they have other funding for it, or whether it's because they're training up maybe the right to. We don't know because we didn't ask them, but it does seem like that was a deliberate move for them to scale back in the budget from year 2 to 3.
Amin, or I don't want to like close out that topic. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything or ask any other questions about the budget.
No, I'm good, Chris. Move on.
Okay. Oh, actually, Rich, are you at this point? You're sort of leaning towards like a meets or below. I'm trying
Meets.
Meets. Thank you. And then Amin.
Yeah, I guess I'll start out by saying I'm leaning meets, but I'm curious to know, and I may not have gotten the full picture, but I'm a little bit curious about how, they say that this is unique in an underserved community, but then they're setting up in an office of a housing group that's in that community. So do we know anything about what services are provided by that other group, and generally speaking about the uniqueness of the services that they will be providing in that community? I guess that's more of a question.
They to describe the role of their partners. So they just say EDC, Eviction Defense Collaborative, will partner with Housing Rights Committee of San Francisco. So that's that acronym, HRCSF, renting space within their Bayview office to host weekly walk-in legal clinics for the provision of eviction defense services and shelter client advocacy. So it sounds to me like it's mostly like they want to be on site in the community where they're providing the services. And so leasing space from them is how they propose to do it. Leveraging the long-term relationship between EDC and HRCSF will exponentially deepen the impact of the Bayview Legal Clinic in several ways. Partnering with HRCSF will greatly enhance EDC's community outreach and tenant education efforts. I'm kind of paraphrasing. Working together will strengthen both agencies' efforts to assess and affect policy matters to improve clients' prospects. And thirdly, this partnership will add a tenant counseling component to the system, starting with EDC's Bayview Legal Clinic. So it sounds to me like being on site, at the risk of paraphrasing incorrectly, being on site, enhanced community outreach, and the addition of the tenant counseling component that I suppose HRCSF brings.
Okay. Yeah, I think having, clinics and being out there and providing that service is always helpful. And I think that's something that HRC is not doing. I suppose that adds to it. I was just kind of curious what the sort of different roles are. I'm still kind of not clear. And I say that because it sounds like they're saying Bayview is not being served at all. At least that's the impression that I got from reading that. But they are being served, but maybe not as fully as they can be. Those are just my thoughts.
I think the way I read it is they're being served. We actually know they're being served by other organizations, but not in the way in which they're proposing now. I believe they've always kind of had this relationship with this other entity, but having the on-site clinic is new to them. And like Chris was saying, this component of the tenant advocacy is new to them. But we were, sorry, we didn't mean to suggest that this area was not being served at all, because there are other programs in San Francisco that are serving baby. It's just that it's a very high poverty area with a lot of need.
Eric, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I really like the idea that they were focusing on an area of high need. I think that was very attractive to me. And their client numbers, you know, are very impressive. So I thought that was good. Also, I'm not too familiar with this. Dwan and you Bay Area folks probably know this better than I do, but I understand there is a right to counsel in San Francisco. And this organization, Eviction Defense, is one of the leading organizations to implement that right to counsel. So I'm sure that they'll leverage whatever expertise they have there. So I was actually pretty impressed with this one. I'm sort of leaning toward exceeds.
Thank you, Eric. And any other thoughts about this proposal? Kim?
I thought the shelter component was pretty interesting. Advocating, and that I found the most unique of the entire proposal. And I think that that's a really necessary element where there's no housing and people want to stay in shelters, but there's potentially a lot of conflict going on and trying to resolve that. So I thought the shelter advocacy component was really important. I had a little bit of a question. I was kind of rereading my notes when I from looking at this. I thought we should make sure that the materials they're proposing to develop, the deliverables, are not duplicative of something already out there. And I couldn't quite recall. I know some of those materials they propose are related to the shelter advocacy and making sure there's a grievance process, but I wasn't sure if there was anything more that was related to eviction defense that might not be necessary for them to be spending time on. That was my only comment. It's solid.
Kim, were you sort of in the meets zone or the exceed zone?
I'm in the meets. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts about EDC's proposal? Well, speaking for myself, think I also have enough information now to go back to the scoring team and come to a final decision. Jim or Dwan, do you feel similarly?
Yeah, I think this one we were a little bit more split on it. It seems like the committee is too, but I do think we have enough to get to a determination. Oh, Chris, you're
I didn't realize I'm too effective at muting myself. So then our final one is One Justice. Also very unique. So just as a reminder, One Justice is a support center, and I think we had 5 support center applicants. The support centers always sort of pitch something that's, might touch on direct services, but it's usually more like systems building focused and strengthening the expertise and capacity of the QLSPs. So One Justice proposes to do that in a really unique way. So just to refresh everyone's memory, because they kind of summarize it so neatly in their own project abstract. I'll just read it out loud. So what they propose is like a 3-phase project. So the first one is consultation with national experts and summarization of research on data-driven practices, and I'm filling in the words for homelessness, what are effective delivery models for homelessness prevention legal aid. Phase 2 is comprehensive analyses of housing service delivery models that can serve as models for programs statewide, particularly in rural and underserved communities. And then phase 3 is a series of convenings to share their findings, to lift up data-driven practices, foster peer-to-peer learning, and encourage new collaborative projects. So it's kind of like expertise building. Dwan and Jim, any other thoughts about this proposal you want to share?
No, but I just want to, for full transparency, Chris and I used to work at this organization, so we did not provide scores for this particular project, and I've recused ourselves and when Jim and Danielle did the scoring.
Yeah, and I guess I should say that for their subgrantee LAC, that I am LAC's appointee on the Access to Justice Commission.
Staff didn't feel that triggered a need to recuse, but it would encourage Jim to share that for the sake of transparency. Eric.
I just had a question, like, for those of you with experience with these organizations, what would be an example of the kind of thing that they would roll out?
So, well, based off of actually, let me pull up, I just read to you from their project abstract. Let me actually scroll down really quickly to their project deliverables and see how they phrase it. So, so phase, I'm sorry, I'm just reading to you from it, but this way I don't misstate it. So phase 3, they propose, for instance, 2 to 3 statewide homelessness prevention webinars on data-driven practices and effective homelessness prevention delivery models. 4 to 6 workshops specific to rural communities and underserved populations, a listserv and Slack channel for LSOs, legal services organizations, technical assistance appointments with homeless prevention guarantees, and a check-in with legal services orgs and community-based organizations to assess their needs and challenges. So it looks sort of like webinars, ongoing technical assistance, and technical assistance through listservs. Unless I missed something in phase 2. So I did actually miss something very material. So phase 2, a resource guide for legal services organizations on data collection and program evaluation best practices. And again, I'm sort of filling in the gap here. I think they mean about to evaluate homelessness prevention delivery, legal services delivery models. And a homelessness prevention guide of evidence-based and other data-driven practices in homelessness prevention. Kim.
Well, I hate to be the first one to speak on this, but I'm going to need some really strong, persuasive arguments that this fits within what the legislature is seeking. I think this is terrific work to be done. I just can't see that it is providing the kind of direct assistance people who are losing their housing. And so I may be out there on my own, but that's my view on it. I would love to see this done. I know that there's a project at Stanford that is looking into things similar to this, I believe. And there are other kind of think tanks doing this sort of work. So I'd love to see it done. I just don't see it fulfilling the mission of the legislation.
And I copy and pasted the text from Assembly Bill 164. Sorry if that was it looks really long in Zoom chat, but just so you don't have to like pull it up on the website. And I will think as a staff member about where I think it fits in, but I'll go to Rich. Oh, sorry, Rich, you were unmuted. I think you just muted yourself, but now you're unmuted.
Sorry. Okay. My impression of this was that it's badly needed. That the training in this area is an ongoing process. The turnover at the QLSP level is great. So you've got a lot of folks who are moving into the area who can use this kind of training. And I thought it's sort of an infrastructure bill program that would enable the QLSPs to better meet the legislative intent.
Thank you, Rich. And Rich, were you sort of leaning in the meets or exceeds?
I would say that this meets.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I would too. I see the connection to the legislation. I'm just not. It's a little abstract. It's a little unclear to me how effective they're going to be. I can't really tell from this. So, if we could come up with a method for evaluation that would be really good, that would be wonderful. We sorely need that, but I don't know. I can't really tell from this how effective it's going to be.
You know, I would invite Dwan and and Jim, or maybe even Donna, if they happen to remember this from like previous years. But I want to say for HP, the language for the authorizing statute for HP1 and HP2 is very similar to HP3. Like HP3, they added the foreclosure prevention, they added the DV piece, but otherwise it's very similar. And in the past, I know when Justice has gotten previous HP competitive awards, they got an HP2 award to design a toolkit, a remote toolkit, I think. And so I know that in the past, the committee and commission might have interpreted the authorizing language so that it could capture what we think of as traditional support center services. So this is like, Kim, you were like, where in the statute does this fall? You know, because I just read it again, and I was like, there isn't really like a clause that really neatly says, or evaluative technical support or anything like that. And I was like, okay, but I wonder if this is sort of consistent with authorized support center projects for other HP awards. And I just actually wasn't here when those awards were conferred. So I'm wondering if maybe Dwan remembers if this sort of thing would have been counted.
Well, there wasn't a project previously that was on point to this one, but I think that it would fall under the last and HP, homelessness prevention, that the kind of the catch-all. The evaluation work, how I read it, in terms of supporting the programs, would lead to an increase in quality of service for the projects, for the services provided, and therefore that would lead to better legal services. That's how I read it. I didn't think that it was not qualifying. I guess that the question is whether you thought in the project impact category, if that was a meets or an exceeds. But the question for me, at least, wasn't that it was not a qualifying project.
And Chris, to me, on the HP3, since a lot of that's coming from federal funding, one of the things that made this round different for me was this stress by the feds on this data-driven practices or empirically based practices that, to tag on to what Rich was talking about in terms of personnel changes, I mean, the people at the qualified legal services providers, they're not academicians. They're not out there actively researching what's going on out there that policies that are data-driven. And it seemed to me that this would provide a good resource for these programs in order to, once they decide this is the particular project we're engaged in, that what is the literature out there that backs up what is effective in this area and what's not. But, you know, to respond to Kim, I mean, it's not representing clients, that's for sure.
Yeah, that was a good point, Jim, actually. Right, that is a difference between HP1-2 and HP3 is the federal government's emphasis of data-driven practices, and that's like all throughout One Justice's proposals. They propose to collect that. I suppose one of the issues the staff and committee sort of encountered in this grant-making process is actually like the lack of data around the efficacy of different types of interventions, except for full scope, which we know there's data to support the efficacy of full scope services. And so it sounds, the way I read Wunsch's proposal is that they were proposing to help compile data to be able to establish that the efficacy of like other types of homelessness prevention services, other delivery models than just full scope. But maybe I was reading too much into it.
Well, yeah, no, I thought that way too, and also their budget. I mean, it's not like they're asking for $1.5 million.
Right.
It's one of the smaller proposals that we read.
Rich.
Chris, I just wanted to add one other thought, and that is in attacking homelessness, it strikes me politically that the contribution of the legal community is often overlooked. We look to social services, we look to government benefits, assistance, and that sort of thing. When you read books like Eviction, you wonder where lawyers fit into this and really what the contribution is. So when I saw that the emphasis here was on data collection, I felt, well, this must have been written by Jim. This is really where he's pushed us and helped us to focus, and why he's been so valuable to us. Because I think that data will demonstrate there is a real role for the legal community to play here. And so I liked it from that perspective.
Thank you, Rich. Other questions or thoughts about One Justice's proposal?
Bonnie, I don't know if you had a chance to read this, but it would be helpful to get your thoughts if you had.
I was just going through it. I haven't thought about it in terms of the, sort of the fundamental question. We clearly, I'll just say, I mean, I think as they point out, what we found with Shriver is that full service representation helps keep people housed, but the vast majority of people leave. And so I think there is some benefit in looking at what people are doing and what works. I'm just not clear how they're going to get it's going to be a big lift because the programs are going to have to come up with the data about what works. Because again, if unless these go by default, these cases are going to be considered confidential, at least for this and certainly for the COVID time period. So it's the data collection piece is always a challenge, but if anybody can get people to collect data, it's probably LAC. And so, I think that, again, I think there is just so much value in looking at what we do and figuring out if that's the best place to put our resources. So, and I'll say Kelly Jarvis is the researcher for Shriver and, very strong. And so, I don't know. I think the question is, can we get data to actually do this analysis?
Thank you, Bonnie. And Kim, did like hearing anybody else's thoughts on like the sort of like value of the proposal or its like permissibility? Has your thinking on it changed, or are you still in the same spot?
I think the proposal is great. My concern is whether this source of funding is the way to get the job done. Mm-hmm. And so I think, like everybody has said, we need this data. There's no doubt about that. We need information about the most effective way to serve clients and as many clients as possible. But I would prefer using a different source of funding for this project. I think it's, one can make an argument that it is connected to what the legislation is intended to do, but it is truly not directly serving individuals who are in a housing crisis. That's just my take on it. Again, if we had another pot of money, that's what I would prefer we use it for. And maybe there is a way to fund it, but I'm in the minority. On this one.
We actually do have other pots of money, are they getting a formula grant?
Yes, let me hold on. I have the list. Yeah, so because the formula grant, right, is based on the IELTA formula, all the support centers get the same amount under the formula grant. So they did apply for one. So their HP3 formula grant, like all the support centers, is $442,000.
Let me just say one more thing, because, I've sort of beat a dead horse on saying why I think this is so important, like the rest of you. I'm so mindful of the legislature looking at how we have spent the money. And I think they want to see numbers and they want good stories of the great work that's been done. And this is really, this is not that. This is something else, which is super important, but for me, just doesn't fit within the same bucket. So.
Thank you, Kim.
Yeah.
I didn't hear anyone, I don't think I heard anyone say this is an exceeds for me. So I've heard like meets and I've heard maybe, like maybe not at all. Is there anyone who this exceeded their expectations under the rubric?
It was sort of a straddling for me. But I see Kim's point, and I would be curious, what the kind of analysis is on where this fits. I mean, I read the language, and maybe it's just because I'm, not quite reading it right. I don't know that I see that it fits squarely within it, but I do agree that this is a very valuable project, and I think this would eventually, hopefully, have an impact, not a direct impact, but it would have an impact on the community in the way that they say that it will, and the way that ultimately this funding is meant to. I just don't know if it's as direct as it needs to be.
I don't know. I think it's a pretty good story for the legislature to have at least one project out there using this money to engage some brilliant thinkers to advise us as to the best strategies for pursuing and preventing homelessness and for evaluating the effectiveness of these programs.
And I'm pretty sure I'll look and check the federal, I'm looking for the federal guidance now, but funding can be, this is federal funding. There was a strong interest in evidence-based practices, and there was certainly funding could be used to conduct research on the use of the funding, but that it would be a permissible use under the federal grant, that just so, which is, I think, important.
And obviously, I mean, one of the legislature's stated concerns, or not concerns, but their stated desires is that as much of the money as humanly possible go to the programs, right? That we be cautious in terms of administrative overhead that we charge to it, right? That we sort of charge the minimum possible. They want to ensure that as much funding goes to the programs as possible, and so it's just sort of figuring out how to sort of whether the approach that you're talking about is something that would really improve our ability to do that and to provide stronger programs that will be able to help more people.
Any other thoughts or questions about One Justice's proposal? Well, once again, I think I have enough now guidance from the committee to go back to the scoring team on this one. Dwan and Jim, do you feel the same?
I do. Jim?
Yes, I do, and I appreciate everybody's input on this.
Yeah, I second that because this was an ad hoc, this was like a surprise meeting that the scoring team called on the week of Thanksgiving. So I really appreciate, we're gonna let you go with 25 minutes early, and we really appreciate your flexibility and availability to meet. I'll just provide the update now that the committee's next meeting is the one at which the scoring team will present its recommendations for funding as well as the actual funding levels. And that meeting is on December 2nd. It's like the Thursday, I think, after we get back from Thanksgiving vacation. Normally we try to post the materials at least 5 business days in advance. So what we're going to try and do is, rather than post the Monday of, we're going to post it before Thanksgiving. I think our target is to post it tomorrow. So you'll get the memo with the recommendations, the profile sheets for all the grants, the spreadsheets that list the scores and the recommended funding levels, et cetera. So hopefully you'll get that by the end of the day tomorrow, or if we can't post by the end of the day tomorrow, we'll at least make sure that it gets up to you on Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Dwan, anything you want to add?
No, we're also going to be making some kind of visual representation that may not come to you until next week or day of, but we are aiming to have at least the scores for you. I think that's the most important thing, so that you will have an opportunity if you want to go look up a project and read it for yourself to see how we scored it.
The visual representation, we like to do a map if we can that shows like where the funding would be going, and all the information in that would also be in the memo and in the spreadsheets, but it's for the visual learners. It's always a nice attachment. And then the commission will, or sorry, the committee will also have an opportunity to evaluate any requests to revise HP2 grant budgets that exceeded 25% of the award. So our our finance team is still analyzing those requests, those revision requests. But if there are any, we'll bring them. We'll post before the meeting, and then staff will come prepared to discuss those as well.
And you all have access to the full application on your portal for Smart Simple. What we post for the public materials is a profile sheet, which is an abbreviated version of the application so that the public can follow along with our discussion.
That's right.
It's a lot of work, guys. Wow. Yes.
Yeah.
And I would just like the committee to think about this when we meet in December. I mean, this is a particularly different approach to doing the scoring of grants, and especially I'd be interested in comments from Eric, who through the partnership went through the kind of old style of dividing up the grants and having subcommittees read the proposals through and then coming together with a score. And whether or not we think this is a good way to do it or not a good way to do it, I'd be interested in people's comments on that in our December.
Well, you know, on partnership grants this year for this round, we're doing exactly what you folks are doing. So we're following you.
Okay.
So they'll come back and ask us that question.
That's exactly. That's what we're going to do. In fact, we're going to ask you to just do it.
Well, I was going to say maybe at some point, as at the full commission, we can have agenda item to kind of debrief to see if this feels like a better, more comfortable approach moving forward, and we can trade notes.
Yeah, and the committee, I think this committee will feel informed, I think, after they read staff's memo tomorrow, well, the one we post tomorrow, and all the, you know, the attachments, you'll know right away if you feel like you've had the information you needed. And then the scoring team will actually like make a presentation to you on the 2nd, where we'll like try to, you know, justify the score and defend the scores. And then at that point, I think it will become clear if the committee feels like it was an effective scoring process.
And we just want to thank Jim for participating in the scoring team. We've met at least 4 times, if not more than that, for the span of 2 to 4 hours. So thank you, Jim.
Well, that's the job. I didn't work any harder than staff did. You guys did a lot more work than I did.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. Happy holidays from everyone at OA and I hope you and your family stay safe and get to spend time together in person somehow.
Same to you, Chris. Thanks for all your hard work. And Dawn and your staff, as usual, terrific job.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Well, we'll wish you well. Oh, thank you, me.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
See you in a few
Thank
minutes.
you. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Take care.